All right, well, let's get started. Andy, you can take the title card down now. I wanted to let everyone know that this conversation tonight is being recorded. It's also broadcast live on Facebook. And it's being held in the Zoom webinar format, which means as attendees, your video and microphone are off, but you can make comments and questions using the chat box, and we encourage you to. We want to hear from you. One of the exciting things about tonight's program is it is live and interactive. For those who don't know me, my name is Megan Weldon. I'm the director of OLLI, the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at Berkshire Community College, and I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's program. This conversation is presented in partnership with Berkshire Eagle and sponsored by Berkshire Gas. We're very grateful to them and also to the Berkshire County branch of the NAACP for joining us in presenting this very special live event today. For those who are not familiar with us, OLLI at BCC provides educational, social, and volunteer opportunities designed especially by and for people 50 years and better. We have over 1,300 members and produce over 120 different programs a year, from classes in science and literature to distinguished speakers, special events, and more. Our members are just like you, interested in the world and learning more about it from great speakers and instructors in great company. If you're not yet a member, I encourage you to consider joining. More information can be found on our website at berkshireolli.org. This Conversations with Authors series would not exist without the extraordinary support of Lisa Sharkey, Senior Vice President and Director of Creative Development for HarperCollins Publishers, where she has acquired and overseen the editing of more than 40 New York Times bestsellers. She always has fascinating books in the pipeline, including Battle of Brothers, William and Harry, The Friendship and the Feuds, by royal biographer Robert Lacey, and Biohack Your Brain, How to Boost Cognitive Health, Performance, and Power by neuroscientist Kristen Willimer, to name just a few. I think tonight's book, though, is probably nearest and dearest to her heart, and we're so happy and honored that to be able to have, discuss it today. Lisa will introduce our special guests. But I also wanted to mention an upcoming online author conversation coming up that has also come about through the help of Lisa, and that is on Wednesday, October 14th at 7 p.m. We'll have Jean Guerrero, an investigative journalist and author of the new book, Hate Monger, Stephen Miller, Donald Trump, and the White Nationalist Agenda, in conversation with another author, Carl Hoffman, author of Liar Circus. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Lisa, who will introduce our extraordinary guest tonight. Lisa?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much, Megan, again, for your always very kind introduction. So I've been a television news journalist and a book publisher for more than 3 decades in my career, and I've worked with a vast array of high-profile individuals over that time. And when I tell you that this book, We're Better Than This, is perhaps the most special and important book I've ever worked on, I'm telling it to you straight. I am not a person who beats around the bush. So it's called We're Better Than This, My Fight for the Future of Our Democracy, by the late Representative Elijah Cummings, with a foreword by Nancy Pelosi, and with quotes of praise from, in fact, he gave this to us literally days before he passed away. John Lewis said there was no greater friend to the poor, to the lost, to the left out, and to the left behind. If you want to understand this great man, read his historic, important book and learn the lessons and values from his moral voice crying out in the wilderness on behalf of our American democracy. So this book is just incredibly, incredibly special. Many years ago, I met Dr. Maya Rockeymoore Cummings through my sister, Tina Sharkey. They're both in the same class of Aspen Fellows. And hi, Tina, I know you're out there tonight. And Maya and I connected through Facebook and social media, and I had given her a bit of advice regarding whether or not Elijah should or shouldn't write his autobiography. And then I heard Elijah when he was the head of the Oversight and Reform Committee. I was watching, and there was Michael Cohen in February 2019. And in Elijah's inimitable fashion, he made his feelings known. And he stood there and he said to the American public, "We're better than this." And America heard his voice loud and clear. And that very night, I reached back out to Maya and I said, "You know what? I want to publish Elijah's book, and I want to do it right away." And as it turned out, they had already started the process of writing the book. He was working with this fantastic Baltimore-based writer, James Dale, who's incredible, and we were off to the races. And I was so honored, really, to be working on this story of a man with such integrity and passion and purpose. And really, how different was Elijah Cummings from the man whose feet he tried to hold to the fire, our president? I mean, what in the world would Elijah say today, on the evening after the most horrific display in US history at last night's debate? I know for sure that he would be urging all of you to vote early, vote now, vote for sure. And in fact, one of the most stirring passages in his book, and we're going to listen to it in a moment, is a story that Elijah told me in person in his office in Baltimore in June 2019. He wasn't the only one in his family for whom voting was instrumental. It actually meant more than anything to his own mother. So Andy, if you're ready, we're going to listen to this audio clip from the audiobook of We're Better Than This, with the narration by famed actor Lawrence Fishburne as Elijah. Andy, let's listen to this audio.
My mother, on her dying bed at 92 years old, uttered some words to me that I shall never forget, that are part of my DNA. She was lying on her deathbed and didn't say, "Elijah, I love you." She did not say, "Elijah, I'm proud of you." The very last words that she spoke before she died were, "Do not let anyone take our votes away." Martin Luther King said, "Give us the ballot." My mother, Ruth Cummings, said, "Do not let anyone take our votes away." And I heed the words of both of them.
Wow, that is very powerful. And powerful is also the word that I use to describe the woman who has worked so hard to make sure that her late husband's life story was able to be published, because Maya and I discussed after Elijah passed whether or not we should continue on. And of course, the answer was yes, but it was a very rough time for all of us. And a lot of the book had already been written. And Maya was tasked with the honor and the beauty of writing that final chapter in the book. Dr. Maya Rockeymoore Cummings is a rock star in her own right, a woman on a mission for inclusion. She's a public policy expert. She's been working on social change along with the private and not-for-profit sectors. She was a candidate for Elijah's seat, former chair of the Maryland Democratic Party, just to name a few things. And this book that Maya wrote the last chapter of, she also recorded the audio of the book of her chapter. And we also had Nancy Pelosi record the audio of the foreword. And what you will also find in the audio book is that the eulogies, the powerful and beautiful eulogies that were delivered at Elijah's funeral by the likes of President Obama, President Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Nancy Pelosi, those are all in their entirety in this audio book. So tonight, Maya will be in conversation with a man who has a lot of knowledge about the civil rights era, and he is a learned individual, Dr. Will Singleton. And like Elijah, he's a graduate of Howard University, and he's a Pittsfield, Massachusetts native and past president of the revitalized Berkshire County branch of the NAACP. His highlights include a master's from Georgetown, a doctorate in education from NYU, and he's a retired superintendent of schools from right around here, Nassau County, Long Island. So we'll interview Maya until about 8:10 for about an hour, and then I'll moderate a Q&A from you guys. So put your questions in the chat. I will be looking at the questions as they come through so that I don't repeat anything that Will's already asked. And just thank you both so very much for taking part in tonight's event.
Lisa, thank you so much for hosting this along with Berkshire OLLI. I'd like to say that both Tina and Lisa have been terrific people in my entirety of knowing them. And that this series is actually in honor of their mother is a testament to her strength and her ability to, of course, raise such strong and brilliant women. So thank you, Lisa, for having us tonight, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Lisa. Good evening, Maya.
Good evening, Will.
I'm sure you're almost talked out after all the interviews you've done, and I want to thank you for agreeing to do another one for the OLLI audience and others who have joined us.
Well, it's my honor. I look forward to this conversation.
Great. Please accept my condolences on the passing of Congressman Cummings. As you know, when we lose someone, we often say he or she will be missed, and it's become a cliche. But it's certainly not a cliche with Congressman Cummings, because his presence, his voice is missed as we speak. And there's no doubt in my mind as we go forward that his voice, his passion, as he liked to describe himself when he talked about issues that concerned him, will certainly be missed, but will be remembered. That's one of the advantages of technology, that he has been recorded. And I listened to a speech that he gave in 2015 at Johns Hopkins. And he was trying to convince, in fact, he did it, convince those young people who were graduating in a health department to give back to people. So I'll stop there. Are we ready to get started?
We're ready to get started.
All right.
All right.
In the dedication of his memoir, Congressman Cummings wrote, I quote, "And to our children, the living messengers to a future we will never see." Maya, what kind of future do you think Congressman Cummings envisioned?
So he was hopeful for a future where we were moving as a nation towards what he always pointed to as our North Star, which is a more perfect union. He worked hard all of his life to make sure that we were advancing as a country, particularly for those communities and peoples who have been most marginalized. And he envisioned a future where our children lived on a planet where they could breathe clean and fresh air, where they could drink clean and fresh water, where they wouldn't have to be burdened by biases and discrimination, where they could live their best lives and have the greatest potential and receive the services like good public education that they need in order to be everything that they're meant to be in life. And so he firmly believed that this is all for the next generations, and that is what he lived for.
Yes. Given American history, the good, the bad, and the ugly, what do you think Congressman Cummings was really saying when he said, "We're better than this"?
So Elijah was saying that we are better than this. If you look at the challenges that we've experienced throughout history, yes, we've had some horrendous challenges in our past, but we always work to overcome them and move forward. And so he saw the arc of what was possible in his own life. Now recall that Elijah was born into a segregated Jim Crow South in Baltimore City. He went to separate and unequal schools in his early life. He felt the pain of having a society turn its back on an entire class of people based on race. He knew that they were, as young Black children, that they were written off by larger society. He could tell the difference in terms of what his school looked like versus what the white school down the street and around the corner looked like. At the same time, he was labeled special education in his early years. And so at the age of 8, he heard Martin Luther King speaking about getting the ballot. And at the age of 11, he participated in a children's integration march to integrate the pool, all-white pool in South Baltimore. And he was led by Juanita Jackson Mitchell, who was an NAACP leader. And so with that, this is a man who started off in the Jim Crow South, but then became a leader in his integrated high school, Baltimore City College. He became the student body president at Howard University, where he graduated with honors. He went on to become a lawyer, earning his degree from the University of Maryland with passing the bar on the first time. Then he went on to the state legislature here in Maryland and became a US congressman, rising to one of the highest offices in that body. And so the arc of his life shows what's possible when people actually pressure the system to do what's right. And it's not just people who are contesting the system, it's people who are actually accepted by the system, understanding what's wrong and saying that we are going to join together as a society to open the doors, to move towards a more perfect union together. So we've done it in our living past, and we can continue to do it in our living present and future.
Thank you. Congressman Cummings said, quote, "We have been stopped from becoming all that God meant for us to be. I don't have time to be patient." What do you think he meant by that?
So, you know, his grandparents and his mom and dad, you know, they were from South Carolina. They were sharecroppers, which meant that they were on a perpetual hamster wheel of poverty and hard work, but never able to get ahead. The system, as you will, you know, systemic racism, if you will, kept them bound in the chains of, you know, unfortunately for them, marginalization and unable to actually pursue their desires in life and their best, you know, becoming their best and highest forms of their selves. And so, you know, he had been taught that, you know, the society has held us back and we need to move forward. And he took that on himself when he saw the power of what the legal profession could do. When he saw Juanita Jackson Mitchell, the first ever African-American woman attorney in the state of Maryland, lead them on that integration march. And when he saw lawyers being able to open the doors to society to actually help to advance those who had been left behind, he decided to become a lawyer because he wanted to have the same impact on the lives of others. He wanted to be able to continuously open doors, and not just for African Americans. The reason why you saw him so passionate about these children at the border being separated from their parents, you know, it's because he felt deeply and strongly that we should and could do better than this for all people who are oppressed and marginalized, and certainly for our nation as a whole.
Yes, as we know, Congressman Cummings stressed the importance of education. He talked about being in special ed, moving to regular classes, being inspired to learn all that he could learn. But he also talked about Black and white students, and sad to say it still exists today, who for a variety of reasons have not been successful in school. They have a tendency to bully those youngsters who are trying to be smart and downplay or even celebrate ignorance as opposed to excellence. And I guess my question is, what did, when you and Congressman Cummings talked about this, what kinds of things did you talk about that would help encourage the young people who are struggling in school and reacting to that struggle in a negative way to convince them that being smart is cool?
So, you know, that passage, you know, he glossed over, and this is really around his middle school years, where he was amongst the first African-American cohort to integrate an all-white, previously all-white middle school. And so, you know, he talked about the kids being cruel and ruthless, about having to try to wait after school to avoid the bullies who were lying in wait to try to beat him up. And he talked about, you know, his older brother, you know, being beat up, you know, and so with that, Elijah decided that education was the key to success. He knew that they lived in poverty, and he wanted so badly to be able to help himself and his family get out of poverty that he linked it together. He understood that education was going to be the key for him to get out of that situation, to get out of a situation where he, you know, wouldn't be able, and he and his family wouldn't be able to live their best lives. And so he made a conscious decision to join with the smart kids and to be proud of it, to be diligent, to be focused and faithful in terms of, doing the best he could in terms of the academic side, because he knew that that was his only pathway. And he wanted other young people to know that too, that you don't have to bow to popular opinion and peer pressure. You can be who you are and celebrate your brilliance and your, and certainly walk in your brilliance without apology.
Yes, well said. The congressman also talked about the bond of family being unbreakable. Unbreakable when things are going well, but when you're really tested, when things are going badly. Would you say something about his thoughts about family and the bond?
Yeah, so he talks about in the book how growing up, his mother and father really kind of rallied them. There were 7 kids, and his father was the head of the household. They were both preachers, they were able to purchase their own home by the time he was in middle school. And he talked about how his father got them all on board with sacrificing to make sure that they could be able to afford a new home as a family. And he talks about how he is made up of his family, what he learned from his mother and father, and what he took from his brothers and sisters. And certainly he respected the bonds of family. But he talked about also how even though family might change over time, that unbreakability, the ability to kind of stick together and to respect the history of the family and to love each other was something that he was saying was very important for all of us to observe.
Indeed. On a sad note, the congressman talked about the murder of his nephew, and he emphasized the need to find alternatives to violence, the need to stress hope and not despair. He said we need to reset the norms. What was he talking about when he said reset the norms?
So, in certain cultures, particularly the culture of toxic masculinity, I think that the standard is that you're a real man if you engage in certain behaviors, whether that be smoking dope or, owning a gun or, whatever. All of these behaviors that end up, actually causing you more harm than good if you actually ever live to see the next day. And so with that, Elijah felt very strongly that, those norms of misbehavior or those cultural, expectations in some cases, and not just African American, white kids, Latino kids, that you don't have to walk in the stereotype, that in fact, we should actively turn our backs on the stereotype because those are the kinds of pathways that will get you killed. And those are the kinds of pathways that will ultimately, perhaps if you're not killed, you're incarcerated. And Elijah felt very strongly that we had too many of our young men and growing an increasing number of young women who were unnecessarily engaged in the criminal justice system. So the lesson, I think he told the lesson of his nephew. And by the way, the notion of him possibly dealing drugs was never proven. It was suspected. But he wanted to share that story because he wants to educate and open the eyes of young people everywhere that they need to make right choices.
Absolutely. Congressman Cummings talked about the majority, the Republicans who are the majority in the Senate, and they seem to go along with the actions or inactions of the Trump administration for the past 4 years. And the attitude seemed to be, go along to get along, pretend that everything is all right, make sure you don't lose your Senate seat. But as I thought about that, as I read it in the book, I said, these Republicans, born and raised in America, They consider themselves to be patriots. They say they're concerned about the welfare of the country. Why did Congressman Cummings think that they acquiesced to the degree that they did to almost everything the Trump administration did or has done?
Elijah believed very strongly that the Republican Party has descended into not a party of principles that are based on patriotism or country or the Constitution, but on power. And he felt very strongly that, that they were aiding and abetting the cruelty, the corruption, and certainly the misbehavior and divisiveness of Donald Trump, simply because they wanted political power to be able to drive their agenda. Now, their agenda is one that it doesn't actually comport with the majority of our nation. And yet they want to continue to ram through that agenda. And that agenda, by the way, rolls back rights for people of color. It rolls back rights for women. It rolls back rights for, you know, people that have different sexual preferences, transgender people. Their conception of what they want the nation to look like is themselves and their immediate family. And so with that, that conception actually returns us to a nation that looks about like what it looked maybe 75 to 100 years ago. And Elijah felt we're better than that. Why try to roll back the civil rights movement, you know, the women's rights movement, the human rights movement? This is a time for us to embrace each other and love each other and recognize each other on the value of our common humanity. That is the only way that we're going to actually achieve a more perfect union. We don't get to where we need to be as a society by oppressing people or denying them rights or mistreating them based on our personal biases. And so he very strongly believed that, you know, that the Republican Party has been co-opted and turned into a party that does not stand for principle, but for power.
Unfortunately, on a more personal note, Congressman Cummings referred to you as his best friend and his soulmate. And as only he could say it, he said, "This is not just an expression. It means, quote, she is my extra source of fulfillment." Would you take a couple of minutes and just tell us how you met the congressman, what attracted you to him and led to your marriage?
So I met the congressman. I got to Washington in 1997, and he agreed to do an interview for my dissertation in early 1998. And, you know, there was no romance when we first met. I was just impressed by him. My dissertation was on the African-American political response to HIV/AIDS. And he talked about the challenge of HIV/AIDS in Baltimore and how it was ravaging the Black community and how Black men were disappearing from his church and nobody wanted to talk about it and how he was looking for solutions even then. And I was impressed that he was a transformational leader, somebody who wasn't necessarily concerned about the stereotypes, who absolutely wasn't concerned about the stereotypes and who was focused on saving lives. And so we actually, you know, I stayed on the Hill. I ended up working for the House Ways and Means Committee. I would see Elijah around all the time. I became Chief of Staff for Congressman Rangel. Elijah started coming sitting next to me wherever I'd see him. And we would talk and chat, and it was like we'd known each other for a million years. There was never any awkwardness. It was just comfortable. And so one day my sister came to the Hill. She had recently become a student, a medical student at Johns Hopkins. And I took her on a tour at the Capitol, and we were sitting outside under a tree, and here comes Elijah, and he starts talking to us. And then he says to my sister, "You know, your sister won't go out with me." And my sister says, and I say, "You know, well, you've never asked." And so, you know, we basically became very strong friends. It became a committed relationship in 2005, and we got married in 2008.
Yes. Thank you for that. Congressman Cummings said when he became chair of the Oversight Committee, quote, "My moment has come to be a lawyer for the whole country, because even a country needs help to get what's fair." What was he talking about when he said that?
So that goes back to the lessons learned as a youth in terms of observing the civil rights struggle and knowing that we still had many people who are being left out and left behind in this country today. And he wanted to be the country's attorney, chief attorney, to basically fight for the underdog, to fight for the things that the people need that they're not getting. And he talks incessantly in this book about healthcare. About the need for people to actually have affordable prescription drugs, access to quality healthcare, because he, of course, was going through his own longstanding healthcare challenge. And he was very empathetic and sensitive to the needs of people who didn't have health insurance like he did. And he wondered, always said, Maya, I don't know how they make it. How do they make it? And he knew that many people don't. They die because they can't afford it. And they die because they don't have access. Mm-hmm. And he thought, we are better than that. We can do better than that. And so that is part and parcel why he tried to actually outreach to Donald Trump early on, mm-hmm. To see if there was some common ground and higher ground he could establish with Donald Trump around lowering prescription drug costs in this country.
The congressman, born and raised in Baltimore, and he used to say, in the book, he says, I encourage young people to stay in Baltimore, but if they leave, take Baltimore with them on their journey, and then consider coming back and giving back. Can you give us some examples of young people who left, came back, gave back, following the congressman's advice?
So I'd actually like to speak to, I see Tina Sharkey wrote in the comments about the Elijah Cummings youth program. Elijah, 20 years ago, started a youth program for young people to basically get support for their high school education, to travel abroad, to Israel in this case, to learn more about the world, to actually get support and help in going to college. And a lot of these students, they had a 100% graduation rate from high school, a 95% graduation rate from college. And you see some of these students doing amazing things. Victor Blackwell, who is a CNN correspondent, sometimes you'll see him on the air on Saturday mornings, was one of the first cohorts of the Elijah Cummings youth program. You've got students who went to Ivy League universities who have come back to Baltimore, and they have established, they're running nonprofit organizations seeking to help the community. And so with that, he firmly believed our children are our future, and he put his money where his mouth was when it came to the Elijah Cummings youth program. But I can't tell you that how many people, after Elijah died, how many people came up to me saying, he got my daughter or my son a scholarship. Mm-hmm. He got, my relative, entry into the Naval Academy. I mean, he did a lot to try to help people be all that they could be, because he knew that in his lifetime, he was looking for those lifelines, those people, those adults who were connected that could help to be the bridge that makes a difference in the lives of young people, especially young people who are disconnected from opportunities. And so he wanted to be the bridge for as many young people as he could, and he worked hard all of his life to do so.
Yes, indeed. He also talked about the importance of home. And I was struck by the way he said, home is not just a hallway, a doorway, an address, rooms. It's much more than that. Would you tell us a little bit about how he thought about and why home was so important to him?
So I'm going to talk about it. And so you all should know that I am a military brat, meaning that my parents were strongly connected to place. They grew up next to each other. They were born next door to each other, grew up next door to each other. They were childhood sweethearts who became high school sweethearts and got married. And so they're connected to place. But my dad went into the US Air Force during the Vietnam era. And so I've never been connected to place in the same way, because we moved every 2 years. So Elijah was connected to Baltimore in just a fabulous and interesting way. He loved Baltimore, the place, as much as he loved its people. And he viewed Baltimore as home, a home where his heart was, because it was the place that nurtured him. It's the place that gave him opportunity. It's the place where Black and white people surrounded him and poured into him and loved him, where he became all that he was meant to be and went on to rise to be able to represent the people of this place. And so home is absolutely for Elijah where the heart is. And in our own home, you know, it wasn't necessarily the halls and the windows, it was our love. And it was certainly his love for Baltimore when it came to the place in the city.
Yes. I probably should have asked you this early on, but I'll ask it now. Why did Congressman Cummings decide to write this memoir? I mean, what motivated him to do it?
Me.
I'm glad you did.
Years ago, way before Donald Trump, I said, Elijah, you have a beautiful story. I mean, just the arc of your story needs to be told. And he had so many stories within stories. Stories from his childhood that were just incredible, not all of which were told in the book. Stories about, you know, his evolution and growing up, you know, life lessons that I thought that were incredible. There were a lot of Elijah-isms, you know, life lessons and sayings that he had that were just profound. And I wanted him to get this on the pages of a book, so that, and then he eventually wanted to, because he wanted to give back to the next generation, to give them, if there was something that he could say or do or show them or tell them that could, you know, help them to avoid some of the trials and tribulations he went through and make it easier. He wanted to do that through the written word. And so he certainly has done that, but he's also done something else. In the last years of his life, you know, it became about the Trump administration. And so, you know, ironically, that we're talking in this election season about his book. And one of the biggest messages from his book was his warning from the grave to the American people. He met Donald Trump. He took the measure of the man. He had to deal and contend with all of the investigations coming out of the Trump administration. And he determined that not only was Donald Trump not right for the position, but he was a threat to humanity and a threat to our democracy. And he wanted to warn the American people, whatever you do, vote this man out of office in numbers so large and so strong in blue states and in red states especially, that he can't even attempt to game the system and to claim an electoral college victory. That is his final message to the American people. And he wanted to send that message because he firmly believed that if Donald Trump managed to secure another term in office by hook or by crook, and I emphasize the word crook, that we would no longer have a democracy.
Well, you've just answered my next question. My next question was going to be that Nancy Pelosi stated that Donald Trump is not fit to be president. And my question was going to be, did Congressman Cummings agree with that? And if so, why? You've just answered it. Congressman said something else about politics in America. And the quote I have for him is, politics as practiced in America is an ugly blood sport. What did he mean by that?
It is.
Yeah, I know.
It's an ugly blood sport.
Sad to say, yeah.
I mean, literally, you know, people will lie on you. You will be attacked. You will be denigrated. You will be unappreciated. You will give your life to service, and you may never see the rewards of that service. In fact, you're more likely to actually be, you know, attacked for it. And so, you know, Elijah felt, you know, that he had seen some of the underbelly of politics in terms of the backbiting, in terms of the corruption, and he felt very strongly that we actually need, and I feel very strongly, by the way, that we actually need to recognize that our institutions are actually only as good as the people that occupy them. And I think that we know that now with the Trump administration. If you have people in these positions of power who don't have service in mind, who seek to pervert the institutions to bend them to their own will or for their own purpose and use, to use institutions against the people and not for them, then, you know, in quick order, we will no longer have a country where we can actually seek to achieve our highest aspirations. We will be living in a banana republic. And he was very concerned that we were headed that way under the Trump administration.
Sad to say. You probably have heard of Carl Schurz, Maya. He was an American statesman in the 19th century, and many have heard his expression, "My country, right or wrong. If right, to be kept right. If wrong, to be set right." As we enter into the third decade of the 21st century, we are a very divided country. Contrary to what a lot of people may think, we've been a divided country from the beginning. Some periods have been worse than others. We may get a new president, we may not. If we do, the divisions will still exist. So my question is, when you and the congressman talked about this, did you have any thoughts about where we might begin to agree on some of the issues, begin to come together to close the gap? Obviously, we're not going to agree about everything, but is there common ground that we can establish where we can begin to come together? What are your thoughts?
So as you well know, Elijah spent a lot of his time trying to find common ground, particularly with Republicans. He had some of the most, what people considered unusual friendships across the aisle, including Mark Meadows and Jason Chaffetz, Trey Gowdy. I mean, people who on the television screen he was going at it with, but behind the scenes he would have very deep and personal conversations, and you know, even friendships. And so he found that if we respected each other on the level of our common humanity, that there was always common ground that could be found that eventually that could lead possibly to higher ground as a nation. And so he always sought to actually establish those personal relationships, finding the humanity in each person, so that you could cut through stereotypes, you could cut through partisanship, you can cut through biases to actually find that common ground. And where we are as a nation, you're absolutely right. I actually call this our zero moment. This is the point, and this fall can be pinpointed in the history of time when it comes to the United States of America about whether we will sink or swim as a nation. And so with that, our common ground should be about the preservation and the strengthening of our democracy. This is a place where we all live, where our children will have to grow up. This is a place that we have to protect and preserve, so that we can actually work towards achieving that more perfect union and have the opportunity to freely do it, because the alternative does not give you that opportunity to fight for your rights and to actually achieve those rights. The alternative of a dictatorship means that people disappear overnight. People are murdered. People are oppressed, they're repressed. They're not given the ability to speak. Just watch what's happening in Hong Kong right now with the Chinese actually, seeking to turn the Hong Kong residents into a repressed state. Watch what's going to happen in Taiwan as they seek to actually expand their influence. And so with that, we have to recognize that our system of government carries responsibilities as citizens, but that responsibility is the price that we have to pay in order to preserve and protect our freedoms. The freedom to speak out, the freedom to protest, the freedom to contest, to make sure that we are challenging the system to make sure that it's right. And so with that, I would say that that's what he meant.
Thank you. Let me move to something that is very important in our society, and that is policing in America. And with all the things that have happened in the past and in the recent months, with Black men and women being killed by policemen, there's been a lot of debate about what do we do about policing in our society. Some people are arguing about defunding. Some people are arguing, don't blame the whole department for a few bad apples. Others are arguing, yeah, but the police do not police themselves. There is this blue wall of silence. I'm wondering, when you and the congressman talked about this issue of policing, what were some of your thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience?
First, let me say, did all of you all see the Chris Rock meme where he did a stand up and said that, you know, there are some professions where you can't have a few bad apples. He said, you know, the airline pilot is one of them. You know, American airline pilot can't say, you know, oh, well, you know, I like to crash into mountains. You know, you just can't have bad apples when it comes to certain professions. And so I just like to take us back to 2004. It was the summer of 2004. Elijah and I were on vacation in Florida. On the news was chaos, just chaos in the streets of Ferguson, Missouri. We saw African Americans in the streets protesting. You know, police were out, and there seemed to be there was no response, no federal response. And so I was just like, you know, I couldn't take it anymore. And so I basically took time out of my vacation, our vacation, and I sat down and I wrote what I call a manifesto, if you will. It was called Beyond Ferguson. And it was calling on the Obama administration to do something about policing in America, because we can't claim to be a system, a nation of laws with due process, and certainly, you know, the ability to, you know, be considered innocent until proven guilty. If we have police officers acting as if they are the judge, jury, and executioner on street corners. And so I partnered with PolicyLink, and Elijah was the third signator on that letter. We got more than 100 leaders from across the country, from all faiths, all backgrounds. We've got some entertainers. We've got people from different parties. And we sent it to the Obama White House. And somebody I knew on the inside said it landed on every desk. It went to the Justice Department. It was at the White House. And so that effort helped, and we ran it in the WashingtonPost.com. And so that effort actually led to the Obama administration's 21st Century Policing Initiative, where they went around the country trying to find solutions for policing and did a big report. But then the very next year in 2015, Baltimore was up in arms about the same issue. Freddie Gray was in police custody and somehow became, you know, harmed in such a way that he died a few days later. His spinal cord, I believe, was severed. And so the Obama Justice Department came to Baltimore, did a study, a patterns of practices study, found out that Baltimore police were regularly engaged in unconstitutional policing, and more importantly, and most importantly, that they were also corrupt. You know, we've since had a number of investigations that have led to the prosecution and conviction and imprisonment of our police officers. And so what happened here is they put in a consent decree. Now, when Donald Trump and his AG, his original AG, came into power, they tried to actually take away our consent decree. Elijah stood up and said no. He got the Maryland delegation to contest them, and he urged the mayor of the city to actually keep the consent decree, because he felt very strongly that if there was no trust between police and the residents that they police, then you do not have a community. You can't have a functioning community with no trust. And so he wanted those guardrails on our policing system. If he were alive today to see what happened with regards to George Floyd or Breonna Taylor, you know, all of the cases that we see happening, unfortunately, still all across the country, he would have wanted us to not miss this moment, to put national standards in place for how we actually conduct policing in this country. He would not have wanted this moment to pass without making sure that we are laying not just a marker, but putting the guardrails on police departments across the country. He would have viewed it as unacceptable that police actually some police actually look at skin color as being the equivalent of crime. And so with that, that's what he would have thought.
Thank you. I'm going to move in a different direction now. I'm going to talk about technology. Some have argued that technology is making human beings obsolete. Others have said, no, technology is going to create many more jobs for the masses of people. The counter to that is, yes, technology will create more jobs, but we won't need as many people. Was it Andrew Wang, who was a presidential candidate, was talking about universal income?
Yang, yes.
Yes, all right. So I'm wondering, when you and the congressman talked about technology and its impact on our society, what kinds of conclusions have you drawn? And as we go forward, do you see ways that we won't have chaos in the streets because people won't be able to make a living?
Yeah. So for years I ran the Center for Global Policy Solutions, which was a Washington D.C. based think tank. We conducted the first ever study of autonomous vehicles on the labor market. And we found that if we actually move rapidly towards a level 5 autonomous technology, meaning that human beings aren't needed for buses, for taxis, for automobiles, that we would lose, I believe it was more than 3 million jobs. And those job losses would be extremely acute in those areas of the country that also suffered from manufacturing job losses when those jobs are sent abroad. And so, this could be a potential crisis in terms of automation. There are studies that actually show over the next 20 years that automation could take many more jobs. And not just jobs in terms of, manual labor, but white collar jobs, in the legal profession and other areas that people think are safe. The reality is that our technology is actually rapidly advancing at such a pace. The question is our education system and our retraining systems, are they able to keep up with the pace of the innovation? And I would argue the answer is absolutely not what we currently have. There are some areas of the country that are doing well with STEM, with young people, and there are some areas of the country that aren't doing well at all. Our children are literally in the educational dark ages when it comes to their ability to navigate technology. And we need to actually address this head on. It's a major issue because if we're going to have any chance of actually beating the automation, both opportunity and threat, with human innovation and more jobs created by humans that are able to leverage those technologies, we have to make sure that there is not just a fundamental understanding amongst our young people about the technology, but they also have the opportunity, and older people have the opportunity to actually shift towards retraining so that they can actually take advantage and leverage as well. And so this is going to take dedication from the country. It's going to take leadership in Congress, which, by the way, hasn't stepped forward yet. We do not have these leaders that are talking technology. And so with that, we have work to do. And as far as Andrew Yang's comment about, I am a Social Security expert. I worked on the Social Security Ways and Means, House Ways and Means Social Security Subcommittee. There is a way to do it. And I think that, if it's done, which we may have to do at some point, that we do it with an eye towards equity, that we set it up in a progressive fashion where the formulas are actually making sure that people who are from low wealth households actually get a larger percentage of what they would have gotten than high wealth households.
Thank you. You've been quoted as saying we need a revolution of inclusion. Would you expand on that a little bit and tell us what you're talking about?
Inclusion revolution. I believe it firmly in my heart. What we have we keep talking about white supremacy or white nationalism without actually operationalizing what that means. And what that means is that the people who hold that philosophy really view themselves as the only authentic Americans. And that view that they are better than everybody else and that no one else has the right to claim authentic citizenship, drives their justification for marginalizing, for passing policies that oppress, for denigrating populations, and certainly for ignoring and mistreating people. And so we've got to challenge that head on, but we can't challenge it head on if all of our communities are actually engaged in the same kind of thing. I've lived my entire life as an African American, and I know that, that there are biases that African Americans hold. There are biases that, Latinos hold. There are biases that, Muslims might hold, or, Jews might hold. And so we have to actually just put these differences to the side and recognize and respect our common dignity based on the value of our common humanity. And recognize that the only way we overcome oppression, the only way we overcome a movement to marginalize and to dispossess, is by joining together, by recognizing that oppression is oppression wherever it is and whomever is practicing it, by understanding these biases and setting them aside to walk forward together into a future where we can actually build a society that is diverse, equitable, and inclusive for all.
Well said, Doctor, well said. We hear a lot of discussion, pundits, editorials about the threat to our electoral process. If you had to pick 3 or 5 things that we should do as a society to strengthen our electoral process and have people feel that technology can't manipulate the voting outcome or anything else, but specifically our electoral process, what 3 or 5 things would you suggest that we do to give us more confidence in our process?
First of all, vote.
Okay.
Second of all, get out there and become election judges, populate, be volunteer, or some election workers are paid. Volunteer and become active in the electoral system during campaign season. Make sure that, that we are paying attention to the ways in which policymakers are trying to suppress our votes and counter them vocally, and use the legal process where necessary. Make sure that, that we're setting up the systems to make sure that people have help as they're trying to actually exercise their right to vote and their civic responsibilities. So that means that we need strong parties that are providing services in education. We need strong nonprofits like the NAACP that are providing services and education and support. We need to make sure that we're supporting these institutions that are doing so much to make sure that we as a nation live up to those constitutional amendments that give us the right to vote, by making sure that we hold the feet of this country, of this country's electoral system to the fire, and making sure that the people who are actually stewards of this system do what's right for the people. There is no reason why in the year 2020 we should be talking about voter suppression, that we should be tolerating a governor of a state saying that you have to pay off your debt before you can vote, that we tolerate the purging of voting rolls, that we tolerate the gamesmanship that's happening in so many places across the country trying to excise voting rights. And so we need to make voting automatic. It needs to be as easy as actually flipping on the television, and it needs to certainly be universal. And so with that, there are a number of things that we need to do, including leveraging technology. And I don't know if it's blockchain technology that we can use to do this, to make a secure voting system in this country that's easy to use. But it's time to innovate. It's not only time to innovate there, we actually also realize the limitations of our system with Donald Trump in office. There is no reason why we should be using an outdated Justice Department unofficial policy to say that a sitting president can't be prosecuted. That means that the Congress has a responsibility to write a law that actually says something different. We need to actually upgrade, I think, our Constitution. I believe that we actually need a declaration of interdependence and inclusion. That, you know, it's not just about independence from a king anymore. It's about us actually putting on paper what our values are as a society in terms of embracing people of diverse backgrounds and declaring that we all need each other in order to make it. And so there is a lot that I have to say here. I'm a PhD in political science, forgive me, but this is, you know, what gets my juices rolling. And so I thank you for the question.
Well, thank you for the answer. I'd be remiss if I didn't say something about our environment. Several years ago, Matt Damon was a star in a movie called Elysian Fields. And in that movie, the planet was polluted, but the wealthy were up in space in a space station and the rest of us were down here. What are your thoughts about, and as I say that, there are a lot of people, as we know, who are fighting to make our planet livable, more livable in the future. But what are your thoughts about the things that we might do? Because some people think that when the scientists and environmentalists talk about these issues, that it's all gloom and doom. And I'm reminded, and I'm serious about this, of the movie Superman, where Superman's father was trying to tell it, the powers that be, that the planet was going to blow up, and they kept telling him, don't you talk about it. Well, a lot of people are trying to tell us that our planet is in deep, deep trouble. And you've got people saying it's all a farce. The sky is falling. And other people who are serious about trying to make things better. This is not about me talking, so I'm going to stop so you can respond.
So this is serious business. It's extremely serious. I mean, if you don't want the polar bears knocking at your door because they don't have the ice that they need in order to maintain their habitat increasingly. The climatologists, the global scientists actually say that we have, and this report came out last year, approximately 20 years, I think they said, before we are at a point of no return. That means that we need to be dead serious. It's so sad that Donald Trump pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord several years ago. But we need to be, as we move forward, and hopefully it's with the Biden-Harris administration, we need to be deadly serious about prioritizing this issue because if we don't, we literally don't, all the rest of the stuff doesn't even matter because we won't have a habitable planet. We won't have a place to live. We won't leave our children with a functioning planet. And so with that, you know, I think that what we need to do is create win-win strategies for our upcoming investments in infrastructure. We do need to accelerate technology. I mean, we have the technology now, the non-polluting technology to adopt. We need to actually mandate those technologies and they need to be phased in sooner rather than later. We need to make sure that the infrastructure that we build across the country and certainly in partnership with other countries around the world actually supports non-polluting technology and the new standards. We actually need to, of course, embrace renewables at an accelerated rate because we also have the renewable technology so that we don't have to rely on the fossil fuel industry. And I think that we actually need to defund the fossil fuel industry because we still cut them breaks, through all kinds of antiquated laws that still are on the books. It's time for us to move into the future, and that future is now.
Well said. This is going to be my final question so that we can get to questions from the audience. Going forward, where do you see yourself 3 or 4 years from now? What kinds of things would you like to accomplish as you go forward with your life?
You know, you asked this at a point where I am literally, for the first time in my adult life, where I am literally uncertain. I have no established track. I just lost my husband almost a year ago. I lost my bid for his seat. And I don't have necessarily any kind of plan formed about where I'm going to be in 5 years. I am literally leaning on the higher power to show me what's next for me. And I believe and trust in God. I'm a very spiritual person. I saw somebody ask a question about Elijah's spirituality. I'd love to talk about that, but we share that alike. And so, right now I am just in listening mode, listening for my direction.
Understood. I'm going to have something to say at the end, but Lisa Sharkey, would you like to take over with the questions?
Yeah, thank you so much. What a great interview, and so many people asking really thoughtful questions. I think it would be interesting, Maya. I just want to talk a little bit about a section in the book in which Elijah attended with you President Trump's inauguration, and what happened in the subsequent meeting after that. And I just think it would be interesting for people to hear that story.
Right. So remember all the drama of the 2016 election. And as a result of that drama, there was a Democratic call to boycott the Donald Trump's inauguration. That boycott was being led by the late Congressman John Lewis. John Lewis, and this is ironic because Elijah and John Lewis were close. Elijah considered John Lewis a mentor and a friend. And also, they were often confused for each other. People considered them twins. People would come up to me and say, I just saw your husband, Congressman Lewis, on television. And so, Elijah went to John Lewis and he said, would you give me special dispensation to go? I think that I need to attend. I need to respect the institutions of this democracy, and I'd like to go. And John Lewis said, I understand, go. So Elijah, that is how Elijah and I found ourselves sitting on the podium behind Donald Trump on that inaugural day where he made his infamous American Carnage inaugural speech. And afterwards, we went into the US Capitol, ironically enough, to the same room where Elijah would later lie in state. But that is where Donald Trump and family were assembled. For him, it was a joyous atmosphere. You could see that he was very pleased. He thought he'd done well in terms of his speech. Ivanka was flitting around the room, talking to groups of people here and there. The First Lady was seated at the front table, basically greeting people as they came up to her. And we were seated at a table with Donald Trump's first cousins from New York, who to me and to Elijah, they seemed shocked that they were even there. And so with that, we watched the speeches. And one thing I want to say is that former President Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton entered. And I'm just like, they had preternatural grace for the situation that they found themselves in to even show up, but also to, of course, have smiles on their faces and to be talking and interacting with the guests. And so after the speeches, and after the meal was served, Elijah and I went up to Donald Trump, and Elijah introduced us. Donald was charming. He was gracious. Elijah, talked about, who he was, and Donald said, he appreciated him being there. And then Elijah cut to the chase. He was just like, man, I'd like to talk to you about prescription drugs. I think that there's something that we could get done together. If we were able to actually reduce the cost, the prescription drug companies are taking advantage of Americans, and people are dying, man, people are dying. He said, I'd like to explore how we could actually work together in order to help the American people. And to his credit, Donald Trump turned to Vice President Pence, who was standing right there, and said, get it done. And to Vice President Pence's credit, he did get it done. They met. Elijah was one of the first Democratic members of Congress to meet one-on-one with Donald Trump. He took a couple of his colleagues with him. But with that, you know, they went into the meeting, and Elijah initially thought when he left the meeting that the meeting went very well. He was honest with the president. He, you know, shared his thoughts and emotions about the situation with the president. He engaged him on, he thought, the level of his humanity. And so as soon as they left the meeting, I think Elijah gave remarks, and then he found out that Donald Trump left the meeting and gave remarks and promptly lied about what Elijah said. Elijah had told him on the inside, man, if you just basically serve all of the people, if you are the president of all of the people, you may go down as a great president. Donald Trump came out of that meeting and said, Elijah Cummings just said that I'll be one of the best presidents that ever lived. And yeah, and so Elijah was sorely disappointed, and that basically set the stage for everything else that happened.
Thank you. That story and so many other stories are what really make this book come to life. In fact, in that room, Elijah sort of shed a tear because in the story that he tells in the book, he said, Mr. President, I know people who have to choose between paying for their pills or feeding their family. And that happens all the time. And the president then said to Elijah, right, are you really crying? Are you tearing up? And Elijah said, yeah, I really am. This really means a lot to me. The president couldn't imagine anyone would actually be honest and really have feelings about this. And I think Elijah was furious about the fact that he was supposed to make something happen. He really felt that he was going to make something happen. You guys put yourselves out there. And then he turned his back and lied. Rocky wants to know, how can we have hope for a respectful, humane future with the lack of morality and ethics given the leaders of our country? Is it at all possible for us to heal and reestablish a working federal government that is bipartisan? And Elijah was so much the man who used to reach his hand across the aisle.
We're not teaching ethics and leadership in our schools. There are, you know, the decline of religion is real. And so people aren't getting ethics and leadership through their religious institutions. We have abandoned the importance of actually teaching ethical standards in this country. And as a result, we are experiencing a crisis of ethics at the highest offices in our land. We have a cult of celebrity and a cult of personality that has allowed Donald Trump to assume office with some level of credibility. And certainly, I think that this experience that we're all undergoing, which is traumatic, by the way, for a lot of people, can be directly traced back to the fact that we have not taken leadership development and ethics seriously. I think it's time for us to return to that. I think it's time for us to rethink how we actually inculcate our young people, especially in the framework of ethics. And I certainly think that we do need avenues for leadership training so that we can grow up people who can actually take these positions and recognize and realize that they're not to be abused, that they're positions of privilege to serve community. Now that's not saying that we don't have people out there that can't do it. They absolutely do exist, but voters need to be discerning enough to select the right people. And so what I'm finding is that voters are easily manipulated. They're very susceptible to whisper campaigns, and they're very susceptible to disinformation and misinformation in ways that pervert our democracy and undermine our highest potential as community and as nation.
Patricia Stevens is asking, can you give us 3 words that Congressman Cummings and you would give to help us be better than this in a post-Trump world?
Love, respect, equity.
That's beautiful. I want to follow up. There was a question about your religious lives, and I know that Bishop Walter Scott Thomas was someone that Elijah was very close with, and his funeral was held at the church there. I attended that funeral. It was so moving, and you gave a beautiful eulogy, Maya. Can you talk about Elijah's religious upbringing? His parents, as we know, or maybe people don't know, were preachers. and talk about yours as a couple, your religious lives.
Right. So Elijah's grandfather was a preacher. I think he found out that his great grandfather came out of slavery preaching. Both of his parents were preachers, and so Elijah got that cadence in his voice, honestly, because he grew up in a household. The story wasn't told in the book, but his mother, very early on, started hosting these evangelical sessions in the basement of their house, and she would get off of her long day's work and traveling to be a domestic in some of the big white-owned houses in Baltimore, and come back and cook for her family, and then open up her home to women in the neighborhood who needed faith. They needed to hold on. They needed, the bonds of the sisterhood that came through the foundation of Christianity in order to make it, to keep their sanity, to keep going. And so she eventually grew that, into an independent church where they moved several times, and later settled into what is now called the Victory Prayer Chapel, where she was the elder of the church and a preacher for many years. Now, he chose not to actually follow the kind of, I think it was, I'm not sure, I think it might have been Pentecostal, the women didn't wear makeup and all that kind of thing. Elijah ended up leaving and, attending a Baptist church where he became fast friends with Bishop Walter Scott Thomas, who still heads New Psalmist Baptist Church in Baltimore, Maryland. Every Sunday at 7:15, Elijah and I would be seated in the pews at New Psalmist Baptist Church to listen to Bishop Walter Scott Thomas give the service. Elijah viewed, and I viewed that service as essential for helping us to get through the week. When you're up against so many challenges, so many powers and principalities, so many issues, and so many negative forces, you need to be grounded. Elijah felt that you needed to be grounded. And for him, that grounding came at the beginning of each week on Sunday. And that grounding that he received on his Sunday visit to church actually sustained him throughout the week.
Well, this is related in a way. So Lisa Philpott is asking, could you deal with the continued personal attacks by Trump on your husband when he was alive? What did Elijah say about them? And what do you think about Trump's thinly veiled racist scare tactic of saying that the cities are dangerous and crime is coming to the suburbs?
So what did we think about, so there's the three-part question. What do we think about Trump's attacks?
Yep, and when Elijah was alive, and you read about this in the book, how devastating this was to Elijah, but also, when you were alone with Elijah, what did he say to you? Because Elijah writes about it, but this is not something he's written about. And then the continuation of how are you responding now to Trump basically saying, everyone should be very scared because they're coming to get the suburbs.
Right. Okay. So first of all, Elijah, of course, was very pained by Donald Trump's attacks on him and the city of Baltimore. Elijah was a man who lived simply. He was honest. He was genuine, which the president couldn't understand, those tears. But Elijah was a deeply empathetic and empathic man. He could feel people. He could feel spirits. He could feel pain. He literally could feel pain, and it would drive him to try to do anything and everything he could for people. I think it was it was one of his superpowers. And so when the president attacked him, and by the way, that attack, the first Twitter attack, came literally several hours after we had an attempted break-in in our home, the home that you see behind me. And so we suspected that Donald Trump may have had something to do with that. Of course, can't be proven. But with that, there was a level of fear, because we had private conversations at the same time. I was being attacked, but we didn't know if my attacks were coming actually out of the Maryland political system or the national political system. And so with that, he kept cautioning me that we are in a dangerous situation. This man will stop at nothing to go after his enemies. And of course, we've heard the First Lady actually say that. And so with that, we were experiencing Donald Trump's wrath, and it didn't feel good. Elijah talked about how dangerous it was for him to have all that power, and for him to actually have a puppet at the Attorney General's office, at the Justice Department. That means that literally anything could go. They could do anything. And so, while that element of fear was there, this is the time when you also lean on faith. But I also think, and you might have heard me go on national news media saying that I actually think that that those attacks actually helped to accelerate Elijah's declining health. That, that the pressure and the stress of it created a situation where his body, I think, decompensated faster than it otherwise would have. And so with that, it was a terrible situation. But let me just tell you this. Donald Trump is a racist. There's no question about that. Donald Trump is a white nationalist. He, of course, as you well know, his father and him were cited by HUD back in the day for not renting to African Americans. He's had, a long-standing and scratchy track record when it comes to his interactions with African Americans. But it's been since he's become president, that the policies that he's pushed, the border policies, being one of them, the census question, which turned out to be racist. I mean, just the shithole countries, the effort to use immigration policy to shut out people of particularly African and Muslim descent. The president is a racist. And so with that, Elijah understood that. But now we all need to understand as a nation that the tactics that the president is using on cities, and Baltimore in particular, is a rhetorical device. It is a strategy to actually incite this level of fear and indignation in whites so that they actually feel justified in terms of turning their backs on majority Black and brown cities and to be engaged in Donald Trump's campaign of division without having any cognitive dissonance about, that these are all American cities. We're all united, but yet Trump is using this as a tool to stoke racism and certainly to stoke division in our nation.
It's a very sad time. And how do you think Elijah would have reacted to what happened during last night's debate?
He would have said, of course, we're better than that. We're better than this. And he would have not been surprised. I wrote on Twitter late last night that Donald Trump's performance last night was the verbal equivalent to what he did to Hillary Clinton when he menaced her on the stage physically in 2016. He attempted to basically dominate and in a way that of course was stifling. It stifled debate. The worst thing that could have happened to him was to actually have a real debate where his where his taxes were actually really debated in detail and where his ignorance was on full display. And so what he decided to do as a bully was to bluster and to blunder and to shut down and to shut out verbally. And that is the kind of chaos that is actually occurring in the Oval Office every single day in this country. Our country will not be able to sustain itself with somebody who brings that kind of behavior to his office on a daily basis. And so with that, he would have urged everybody, see, this is what I mean. We cannot vote this man back into office. And he would have appealed to Republicans to listen, that this is dangerous. We are literally at a dangerous moment in time in history, perhaps the most dangerous, certainly in our lifetimes, if not ever in the history of this country.
I think this is a very interesting question from Aileen Lee, who I think you know. If Elijah had been here to help Joe Biden with debate prep, what advice would he have given to Vice President Biden, and would he have predicted that the president would have acted the way that he did last night?
I think that he would have predicted that Donald Trump would have been Donald Trump, and that was Donald Trump. The chaos was on full display. The racism was on full display. Not being able to actually, disavow his affinity with white supremacists, that was all on full display. Take it in. You know, all those people who say that they were embarrassed by the president's performance, realize that this is the man. This is the man who represents you and who has taken this country down to the level that we're at now, right now. And so Elijah would have encouraged Joe Biden to stay focused on his message, which Joe Biden tried to do, although I think he was pulled off his game several times. He would have encouraged Joe Biden to actually share his affirmative message with the American people, not just why they should vote against Donald Trump, but why they should vote for Biden-Harris. And he would have encouraged Joe Biden to talk about the need for unity and the need to make sure that we are joining hands as a nation to try to save our nation.
If you were offered a post in the Biden-Harris administration, would that be something that you'd be open to?
No, I'd never say never. Certainly, you should know, just in the interest of full disclosure, that in 2016, I was on several of the Hillary Clinton policy teams, and I was actually all set to be named to her transition team. I was going to be actually co-lead for the transition for the Social Security Administration. And all of that, of course, went to pot once Donald Trump was elected. I've been interested before. I might possibly be interested again.
I'm interested in your answer to this question. Ellie and Marilyn Katzman are saying, what do you think is the rationale of anyone who's Black who would support Trump, and you even see them at Trump rallies?
So I think it's different for different people. I think that there are some that are self-promoters that, see a gravy train. They know a gravy train when they see it. They know that having Black skin and an all-white environment can advance you real fast, quick in a hurry. And so they adopt the language, they adopt the ethos and the ideology, and they don't care what it actually means for other people who look like them. They don't have a sense of loyalty to community or to country. They have a sense of advancement and self-promotion. So, I think that you find some people like that. But then you have your old school Republicans, people that I highly respect, like General Colin Powell, who came up in a time, and by the way, I'm a military brat, although my parents were both Democrats. And by the way, Will, I never told you, my dad was not just, he headed was a director of the Democratic Party in his town, but he also headed the NAACP as well. He was his chapter president. Okay. But I respect people like Colin Powell because they come to it honestly. They are, national security specialists, or they might be true fiscal conservatives who still believe in the old school party. This is not the party of Donald Trump. The party that you once believed had that ideology of perhaps fiscal conservatism or social conservatism that you might have been attracted to, or strong military values. This is not the party of Donald Trump. And so literally people like that find themselves, I think, without a political party home. And I think that those people are ripe for picking for Biden-Harris.
I know Will has one more question, but before we wrap up, and I just want to remind people that the book's just gone on sale. A week ago, We're Better Than This. Oh, Maya's got one too. So we also have a beautiful quote from Representative James Clyburn. He says this memoir serves as an urgent call to action for all Americans as we strive to live up to our nation's pledge of liberty and justice for all, as only Elijah could deliver it. So whether you're going to buy the book in hardcover, ebook, or listen to Lawrence Fishburne's beautiful rendition of Elijah's voice, highly recommended. So many people are weighing in saying what a great conversation this has been. It's been just one of the great honors of my life to work on this book, to work with you, and to be able to moderate this session tonight. So I'm going to throw it back to Will for one final thought, and then we'll all sign off. And thank you all.
Thank you, Lisa. Maya, I just want to say thank you for doing the interview. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I have no doubt that you will find the best path for you as you go forward with your life. I just want you to know that I wish you the best, good health. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Will. Thank you. I wish you the same, and I just deeply appreciate you and the entire Berkshire OLLI team. Lisa, thank you for your expert guidance. You've been a fantastic publisher, and I deeply respect your leadership. Thank you so much.
And just thank you to the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at Berkshire Community College and Megan Wilden and all the people who help. I want to remind you all that they have so many courses, and typically you'd have to live in the Berkshires to attend these classes, but while we're all sort of under orders not to really go anywhere, you can take these courses by joining OLLI. And there's a full, beautiful load of courses for each season. And I know, Will, you're on the board. It's wonderful. Just a quick story. Our first Mona Sherman Memorial Lecture took place. My mom passed suddenly in October of 2008. And that day, literally that day, our family decided that we should host a lecture in her name, given for free to the general public. And our first lecturer, because my mother was obsessed with her, was in May of 2009, and it was Mika Brzezinski. And my mother loved everything about her, her intelligence, her hair color and cut, her suits. She just really loved Mika Brzezinski. And Elijah performed the wedding between Mika and Joe, and my mom would have been so excited to know that that happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Mika and Joe are great friends, and he was honored to perform that wedding. And by the way, my mother loved Mika and Joe too, and she called their connection before they ever, I think, even realized it. So yeah.
Thank you all, and everybody vote, and make sure that you do it fast.
Yeah.
Have a beautiful night.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.